Hi, everybody. Well, Steph and I are working together today to review the differences between a residential listing and a residential offer to purchase contract from a condo. So for the most part, they're both very similar to the residential listing and the residential offer to purchase. But the differences we're going to highlight today. Because if you're selling condos or have a buyer for condos, you're going to need to know what these differences are. They're very important differences. So, does everybody see my screen? We'll get ready.
Yeah.
Good, thanks. This is on page 1. This is the section that is in the condo listing contract, but not in the offer to purchase listing contract. And it's regarding limited common elements. So as you know, a condominium is a unit in place, and then and the owner owns everything within the walls. Outside of the walls of the condo are what's called common elements, limited common elements. And so they want you to make sure that you list what those are. And that can be a pool, it can be tennis courts, it can be storage facility. Oh, that's already in there. But any limited common elements in this condo. So you work with the seller in this, making sure that they have it. If the seller doesn't understand this or have it, you can go into MLS and look at similar listings from that building, or you can call the management company to find out what the limited common elements are. And it's also in the condominium declaration for will also list all of the limited limited common elements. So make sure that those are in there and the buyer knows what they're getting and what they're not getting. So on storage is the next one. A storage unit is or is not included in the list price. And if it is, what the storage unit number is. You got to be careful about parking and storage. Sometimes they can be deeded into the ownership of the condo. Sometimes they are separate. So make sure that when you're going over the condominium declarations, that you understand how the storage unit, and the parking space are being transferred to the new buyer. So the parking is also here, and it says what it is. Usually it has a slot number or two, and then you make sure that you put in the correct parking fee per parking spot. So, sorry. Whoops, excuse me. The association fee for the property is, and you put what that is, it's usually a month per monthly. Make sure you get the most current one. And then a right of first refusal. We don't see this much anymore. We used to see it a lot. But most associations have found that it's not very safe to put in a right of first refusal for fair housing potential problems. So the condominium association does or does not have the right of first refusal on the property. So those are extra things in the listing contract for a condo that are not in the residential. So there's a big deal about the condominium disclosure materials. And you and your seller and the management company or the association president make sure that you have a current copy of the condominium disclosure materials. You're not using the seller's old one that they've got when they bought it, or you're not using one that's in your files from when you last sold in this building. You have to make sure that you have a new one, and you provide it to the buyers with a complete, current, and accurate copies of the materials required by the state statute. Seller is required to provide buyers with the condominium disclosure within 10 days of the acceptance of the offer, but no later than 15 days prior to closing. So that time frame of 10 days after the acceptance of the offer is important because of the rescission right that a buyer has. And we'll clearly get into that in a second.
Joan,
Yes,
sorry to interrupt. Is it okay to ask a question?
of course, anytime.
Do you have to, if you're representing the seller, do you formally get a sign off from the buyer that they received the materials to
Yes,
start the?
yeah, it's a good idea. There is, some people do it just on a notice that they received it. I think there is a form that says they've received the materials.
I can show this, but it's on a notice.
Yeah, it's on a notice. So really, you just have to pull up a notice to the offer to purchase and say that we received it on this date. Just make sure everybody's on the same page about the 10 days. Is that good? Okay. Seller is responsible at seller's expense to obtain all required condominium disclosure materials, and they're listed below. These are the required materials and documents which may be requested by a buyer in terms of the offer. So it gives the buyer the option to add more disclosure materials than the required list, which is printed in the listing contract and will be in the offer too. So a buyer may want something more than just the required ones, say typically minutes for the last 6 months or something like that, so that he understands what's really being talked about with the association and the homeowners. Promptly provide the buyer with any amendments or updates to the condominium disclosure material arising before closing. So if they come up with something while you're in contract, you must sure that you get those updates with an amendment to the buyer. The condominium disclosure materials required by statute include a list of the following and any amendments of these. So I'm not going to read every one of those, but those are what you are going to be sending to the buyer and the buyer's agent. So as I say, it's typically all of these are bound into one document of the disclosure materials. They come in a little book. So as I said, if the buyer wants something different or added to this, he puts it in the contract, and it also then becomes required to be delivered in this same time frame, within 10 days of acceptance of the offer. So if the condominium was an occupied structure prior to the recording of the condominium declaration, it is a conversion condominium. And the condominium disclosure materials for conversion condominium with 5 or more units also include, and this is important, a declarant statement based on the independent engineer architect report describing the present condition of the structural, mechanical, and electrical institutions, a statement of the useful life of the terms covered in statement 1, a list of notices of uncured code or municipal violations. So these are important to be added to the declaration materials if this is a conversion. And as I say, a conversion condominium is one that was occupied prior to recording of the condominium declaration. A buyer may at any time within 5 business days following receipt of all of the condominium disclosure materials required by statute rescind the offer by delivering a written notice without stating any reason or any liability on his or her part. If condominium disclosure materials provided by the buyer are incomplete, the buyer may within 5 business days of the receipt of the incomplete materials, either rescind the offer or request any missing documents. Now the seller has an additional 5 business days following receipt of that request for missing documents to deliver these added documents. A buyer may rescind the sale within 5 business days of the earlier of the buyer's receipt of requested missing documents or the deadline for the seller's delivery of the documents. So we get into a little back and forth here. Say the buyer did ask for the additional minutes of the meetings for the last 6. So all the required documents were sent over to the buyer, but he still didn't get his minutes. And so the buyer may at any time say, I'm still missing the minutes. I'll give you 5 more business, I need 5 more business days to see the minutes. And then he has 5 business days to decide whether he's going to stay with the purchase or rescind his offer. So this is very important when you are listing a condo that you explain this to the seller. Understand what his role is in getting that material over. And a lot of it also depends on how good the management company is. Some are very organized and can get this to you right away. You might have to pay for an updated condominium documents. Usually the agent pays for it. Sometimes you can get the seller to pay for it. Any questions on this about rescission times and dates? So you have to understand it before you get your seller to understand it. Also with the paperwork that the seller has to be responsible for is a condominium addendum to the real estate condition report. So there is a real estate condition report for a condo, but you also, in condos only, have to add this addendum to the real estate condition report. And the things to remember is the size of the condominium that it's in. They fill this, the seller fills this in, the name of the condo, so identifying it, the contact information for the unit owner or the unit owner's broker. And then condominium association, who's the name of the condominium association, the address of the association, and the other, whether it's self-managed or they have a management company, like Hunt Management would be a good one. And then the condominium assessments, fees, and charges. The unit owner is responsible for the following current condominium assessment fees and other charges. The executive summary, it is only required for condominiums that are over, is it 12 or 5?
12.
12. So any condominiums that have more than 12 units, they are required to have an executive summary. And what that is, it's actually very nice because it summarizes the probably 60 or 90 pages of the documents into the important documents for that condominium. So
Hey, Joan.
if it's lower than 12, you won't get one. Yes.
Hi, Joan. Jolene posted a question in the chat. She's unable to unmute,
Okay.
but she says she has a client that wants to rescind. What's her first course of action?
Well, if they are within the 5 business days, and remember, business is an important word. So you skip weekends and everything. Within the 5 business days, that buyer can, with the buyer's agent, write a notice saying they are rescinding this offer and making the statement that they, by dates, they are within the 5 business days. They don't have to give any other information of what they're objecting to or why they're objecting to anything. They just say it is their right to rescind within this time frame, and they are rescinding their offer. But if they're not in that time frame, if they've gone past the 5 business days, obviously their rescission right is gone.
It's a rescind and camera or just the notice? is required.
You can send a camera with that notice. And they will get their earnest money back, because that's within the contract. Is that clear?
Joni, it's not. I just want to add something in that. I've learned through a few condo deals in the last few years that it is so critical to review the board meeting minutes of the association, because a lot of times either sellers don't attend those and they don't care about the fine details of what's happening in their HOA, or they don't disclose it. And it can be very dangerous right now, especially with older buildings needing roofs, all the infrastructure, and a lot of HOAs haven't raised their monthly fees in a very long time. And they'll get smacked with special assessments in order to keep the insurance on that condo association because of repairs that need to be made. And I experienced that with 2 separate deals. So, one was a cash buyer and he waived everything, but the one thing he didn't waive was the review of those documents. That's how important it is. And I just wanted to throw that out there to everyone. Don't ever feel pressured to waive that right. You could be surprised in the worst way with your client down the line. After closing, they're calling you screaming, crying, the whole 9 yards. So.
You're right, Nada. I appreciate that, and it's sort of the way I'm finishing up my slides here. That your duty as a buyer's agent is always above and beyond. It's not relying on the buyer to look these things up or read them. You could even advise your buyer to have a lawyer review the declarations and everything if it's beyond what the buyer can actually do. But those declarations, bylaws, and decks are very, very important to the lifestyle that the buyer is going to live in that condo. And some are very restraining and some are very loose. Can you have pets? Can you rent it out? All these different things, that's all in the condominium disclosure materials, and they must be read carefully. As I said, the important parts of the condominium disclosure materials are in the executive summary. So you can start with reading the executive summary. That'll talk about pets and renting and things like that. And then if you want to get more into the details, it's important, as Nada said, to understand or help your buyer understand what they're going to be living with. Very good. Anybody else want to chime in? Let me see, did I get everybody else in chat? Yeah,
Mind if I just take your computer?
you would?
Do you mind if I just take your computer when?
Oh, no. So, as I said, a seller agrees to provide buyers with complete, current, and accurate copies of the condominium disclosure. Buyers can also ask for additional documents like recent association minutes. Yeah, it says here in orange, and I'm not sure if I really, going backwards, agree with this. The listing agreement says that it has to be within 10 days of acceptance of offer. There's a sort of a trend going around saying if the buyer gets the documents out of MLS, and a lot of times they're in MLS, that the 10 days start when they received it. I'm not sure I agree with that. But a lot of people feel that that's, that if they got it right out of the MLS, then their 5 days start. And then there are arguments between the listing agent and the selling agent. But the contract says they have to receive it within 10 days of an accepted offer. And then the buyer has 5 days. So here's my last slide on the listing. This is what I was saying and what Nada brought up too, that all of the additional amenities that are in the condo and features must be accurate. Don't ever, 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 ever use an old listing out of MLS to copy into your features and amenities because things could have changed. And always the seller may not be aware of what's going on, as she said. So it's your responsibility as the listing agent to verify your listing agreement with the seller that they understand the association fee, the current one, parking space locations, what their identity is, any fees, parking may be a limited common element for a unit or included as part of the unit or separately deeded transactions with their own tax bill and record. Make sure that you know what kind of parking spaces are being offered. Storage units or units and their location. Unpaid assessments shall be paid by seller no later than closing. Eligible for FHA financing, such as percentage of owner-occupied units of a project. Make sure you check into that availability with the condo association. A seller requests a copy of the condo from association. There may be a fee listing agent to remind seller for the payoff amount. Some sellers have a built-up payment that they're due, and they have to do that payoff amount, obviously, before closing. Seller cannot deliver old copies of the documents and bylaws. There's probably a lot more detail in listing a condo because you're dealing with not only the ownership of the buyer, their property, but you're also dealing with a conglomerate of owners and an association president. So your life is not totally your own in a condo. So I'm going to pass this over to Steph now, and she's going to do the offer, the difference in an offer to purchase than a residential.
Okay. Thank you guys for your patience. It's been a little disjointed with tech, I feel like, on the compliance on our end with this training lately, so I'm sorry. My Zoom was not working, but I've got it to work while Joan was teaching. So, okay, so I'm gonna take over and go over the pieces of the condo offer that are different from the regular offer to purchase. Before I begin, Joan ended on the fact that, there's more parties involved with a condo, with the condo management company. I'm just gonna say here, get to know your condo management company. When you're dealing and working with a seller at a listing appointment, get that information right away and introduce yourself. The more you can connect with them directly, I think is good. Just again, having that direct relationship, direct line of communication with the condo association company is just really going to streamline the process for you. Nada, yes. So make sure to do that. Okay, so again, the condo offer to purchase. So this is right on page 1. And again, we've just isolated the pieces that are different from the regular residential offer to purchase. So on page 1, it addresses storage, parking, and fees. So you're going to identify whether or not there's a storage unit included in the purchase price, what the storage unit number is, if applicable. You'll find this information on your MLS data sheet. So look there. And if it's not reflected, then I would go ahead and make sure we're asking the listing agent. And 9 times out of 10, this is something that you would be addressing at the time of the showing as well. Parking, you're gonna identify again, the parking situation, so are there parking spaces assigned? If it's a 2-car attached garage, you could just say that there. You're just really gonna specifically describe it. And then if there is an extra parking fee, you would identify that in that next space. The association fee, you're gonna put that here. So again, you're gonna find that on the data sheet. Typically, it is a monthly fee per month. Yeah, monthly fee per month. Typically, it's a fee per month. Sometimes it could be a quarter by quarter though. So there was an association that I worked with recently that it was billed quarterly and not monthly. The unit transfer fee. So this is kind of a buyer beware statement. Buyer is aware that the property may be subject to a one-time fee resulting from the transfer of the property. Any fees resulting from the transfer of the property shall be paid at closing by, and it defaults to buyer. But if this is something that you want to make a negotiation point of, then you could strike buyer and indicate that the seller is going to pay for it at closing. But typically the buyer is paying for this. And this is also another item that you would find within the condo docs. And this is also a question that is posed on the condo addendum to the record. So I would look there as well to find out if there is a transfer fee. All right, 49 through 51, there's a note here. So the association may charge fees at or subsequent to closing, which may include additional association reserves, administrative or other fees. Buyer is advised to review the condo disclosure materials. I'll say transfer fees and those move in, move out fees are the ones that are found late. We've fielded many questions where it's like the week of closing and everyone is surprised by a transfer fee. Because another checkpoint for that is that the title company is also working with the condo management company to figure out what those fees are, if there are any special assessments. So I would say 9 times out of 10, that is when that transfer fee comes to light. So, and it should be, I mean, that should be known actually prior to even writing an offer. So listing agents, that's also a call to you to make sure that we're asking that question. Okay, any questions so far? Pretty easy. Then we get into the condo disclosure material. So this is actually, this language mimics what is in the listing agreement. So, you know, when you're listing condos, you know, we're setting the stage for this request in the offer to purchase. So, starting at 107, the seller agrees to deliver to the buyer within 10 days after acceptance the current and accurate copies of the condo disclosure materials. And again, this mimics what's in the listing agreement. So, you know, there are a set of standard documents that are exchanged in a condo sale. So the existing declaration, bylaws, and rules and regulations, the existing articles of incorporation, existing management contract, projected annual operating budget, leases, general description, unit floor plans, and the executive summary if applicable. So again, this is that standard stuff that a buyer would expect to receive in a sale. The buyer rescission rights again, and I like how, and again, in the listing condo listing contract, it sets the stage for the seller. So this isn't a surprise to them. This shouldn't be a surprise to them when they receive this offer. But once the buyer receives those condo docs, then they've got those 5 business days to review. And then what's nice about the this provision is that their buyer does not have to cite any reason for why they want to exit the deal. They can just say, upon review of the condo disclosure materials, buyers exercising their right to rescind the offer, and you would put that in the notice. Back to Joan's comments on the receiving in the MLS, within the MLS because they were made available. I disagree. I think that, I mean, I'm in line with Joan disagreeing that the days could count prior to even writing an offer. I think that if you want to include verbiage that the buyer received all of the condo docs, right within the offer to purchase, you could do that. And then maybe those 5 business days begins upon acceptance. But the most recent condo that I wrote on, they were all made available in the MLS, but then we still, after acceptance, asked the listing agent to deliver the condo docs. And then that way there was a record of it. There was a record of us receiving it. And then a record of my sending it on to the buyer. And I can show you, yes, the, I'm gonna put a pause here. I'll pull up the condo doc receipt. So this is actually coming from our clause library. So you'll use a notice and go to clauses on the right-hand side here. We're going to go to global, and it's condo disclosure materials receipt.
Can you give us again one more time? Just so I can get
You
it.
can plug it right in here. Have your buyer sign that. And then from that day on is when we would count the 5 business days.
Clear.
Very clear, yes. Sometimes we'll get the question, do we have a specific form? We don't, we just are using the notice. All right. Okay, so then next up, so, we just went over those standard documents that a buyer should expect to receive as part of the sale. And this is relatively new to the condo offer to purchase. This additional contingency, excuse me, for additional condo information. So if the buyer wanted to, they could make the offer contingent upon receiving these additional documents from the seller. So that includes things like the condo association financial statements for the last 2 years, the minutes of the last 3 unit owners meetings, the minutes of the condo board meetings during the 12 months prior, information about contemplated or pending condo special assessments, the certificate of insurance, statement from the association indicating the balance of reserve accounts, any common element inspection reports. I just helped one of our agents with this not too long ago. There was a compromised basement many years ago, and a condo building that's right on the river, and there was some issues with river water getting into the basement. So they wanted to see those inspection reports. The declaration, bylaws, budget, and or most recent financial statement of any master association or additional association. On line 163, you could put other. So I just had to do this for a condo buyer. I can't remember what we were asking for again, but it was outside of these. So we just wrote it right in. But same rules apply in terms of, you're going to request these documents, and then once you receive them, then the buyer has, again, another 5 business days to review these materials. So if you are making the offer contingent upon receiving this additional information, 9 times out of 10, you'll probably receive all of those condo documents plus this at the same time. And then so it would be the same 5 business days. But maybe you received this extra set, you know, secondary to the, those first set of condo docs, and then you would have another 5 business days. So, you know, I know that we kind of like to speak to like strategy too when you're writing in competition. Sometimes buyers agents and buyers will leave this contingency off, but to Nada's point earlier, there is a lot of information within this within this set of documents that a buyer would want, could want, and it could mean, the difference between wanting to move forward on the condo or not. So just know though that it's a contingency, it becomes another term that you can negotiate. So whereas the other set is standard and must be provided. So any questions before we move on? I spend a lot of time on this. It actually isn't as black and white as we want it to be. So yeah, so just obviously, as we always say, ask and reach out with questions. The next, I actually think I got a better, yeah, here we go. The next difference between this and a regular offer to purchase are just the definitions that you would find in a condo sale. So, I'm not going to go through each one, but we've got association in the definition, additional association. So, it could be the case where there's 2 governing bodies within a building. What common elements are, the condominium itself, declaration, and limited common elements. And then continuing on, a small condominium. So this is what Joan was alluding to earlier in terms of the executive summary. So a small condo means a condo with no more than 12 units, and they are exempt from having to provide that executive summary. But an executive summary might still be a part of it. It's not required by law where it is with any association 12 units or above. Special assessments. So you guys are hopefully familiar with the line in the offer to purchase on special assessments. And this is similar. So lines 544 to 557 in the condo. Special assessments levied for work actually commenced prior to the date stated on line 1 of the offer shall be paid by the seller no later than closing. All other special assessments shall be paid by the buyer. And then it gives a warning, consider a special agreement if area assessments, property owners association assessments, condo association special assessments, etc. In these lines. So where we're going with this. If there are special assessments actually levied, and that means there was a clear direction from the board that work was going to commence or occur, if that was done prior to the date of the offer to purchase, then the seller is on the hook for that. So that's a conversation that you're going to want to have with the seller. And, sometimes these assessments are pretty costly. So if the seller wants to make any statements about that prior to receiving an offer, maybe they would be okay with, half of that work, maybe they would be okay with paying the assessment up to a certain point. But those are definitely conversations that you're going to want to have with a seller ahead of time.
And some of those are scheduled out.
And yes, and Joan was just making the comment that sometimes this work is scheduled out and people are paying it in increments. So according to the offer, that seller would be on the hook for paying the bulk of the increments, because that special assessment was levied prior to the offer. So, again, it's just gonna be conversations with the seller up front about that. And then this is where a buyer would could potentially learn this information and those additional documents within that contingency, is that if there's contemplated assessments coming, so when it's contemplated, that just means like the board is talking about it, they're considering, making repair work, or improvement work, but no final decision has been made. So let's say that assessment is levied between acceptance and closing, then that assessment is going to be the responsibility of the buyer. So where we're going with this, it's just, again, another thing that I wish were black and white, where, I helped an agent a couple weeks ago where it appeared as if a assessment was levied prior to when they wrote the offer. I think it was to the tune of 15K. To me, it was just like, well, the seller, per the offer, the seller would be paying for that. But then it still ended up being something that was negotiated, and the buyer or the seller kicked in, I believe, 5,000 for it. And then the buyer was going to take on the rest of it. So I think 9 times out of 10, these things are negotiated, even though it's pretty black and white in the terms of the offer. So I think that might be my last slide too. Oh, well, here's where the actual special agreement language is. I just summarized it before, and this is the exact language. So yeah, that's my last one. So not too many differences, I mean, but big differences, like
Right.
not too many, but the quality of difference is high. If that makes sense. So any questions? We've got 15 minutes, so if you guys have just general questions on anything, whether or not it's condo related, we can take those too.
I've got a question, Steph.
I see Nada about to chime in.
Can you hear me?
I can.
So non-warrantable condos, if it's a new condo development being built, doesn't have all the HOA documents or any HOA documents, what there?
I think that is, oh, I'm gonna have to. That might be, more meaningful if there's a lender involved.
And a lot, a lot of times, a developer of a condominium that isn't fully complete like that, they will have their own offers to purchase and addendums to go with their offer that sort of explains what happens as the development continues on. So, you could get help from the listing agent in some of those questions.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes.
So for I know the condo is a form of ownership. It's not like a form of building. So those houses that are in a subdivision, every house is separate, but they have an HOA fees. This applies to them, right?
Correct.
Well, it may not be subject to there's the homeowners association versus a condo association. So like there wouldn't be, like you would still use a regular residential offer to purchase on a home that's in a subdivision.
Well, yes.
So
But
condo association offer to purchase is just in when I put in an offer on a an apartment or a house that is under the roof of others, or under the same roof?
No, there are different types. There's a condominium, excuse me, there is an association, homeowners association for a lot of subdivisions. And they have their
Yes.
owners and everything like that. And you can then write it as a residential house. But there are some subdivisions that are condo subdivisions. They're all separate, single-family homes, but they're under condo law, which means the owner only owns the building, the home inside, and the outside and the property around it is all owned by the condominium association. And those, and I'm trying to think of the big one in Mequon, those you write a condominium offer to purchase on.
So let's say I'm a listing agent, and my buyers for some reason doesn't know if it's a condominium. Is this a possible? How can I know? Is there the resource I can for sure know this is a condominium versus like just an HOA subdivision?
The seller would know that.
Okay.
The owner of the building, of the residence would know that. Yeah,
Yeah, how they bought it and
right.
how they bought it was made very clear that they did not own their yard, that they did not own the exterior, surroundings of the house. They only owned the inside of the house like a condominium. So they went through a lot of rigmarole in buying it to know that that was a condo and not a residential.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wish I could think, there's two developments in Mequon right around where I live. And they are condominiums, even though they look like single family homes.
It's rare that there's single family detached style, so typically when you're dealing with a condo, it's either like a side by side or, the apartment style. But any other questions?
Well, we appreciate the number of people that signed in today. We're gonna keep it going. We're coming up with new topics. If anybody has a suggestion for a topic that we can do in contract training, we'd love to hear from you. But thank you all for attending today.
And nothing next week due to
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. No training next week due to spring break. Okay,
Thank you.
guys.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Nada. Thank you for the comments.